How did Paul, Roman Paul, so thoroughly infiltrate Jewish society? I'm the Christian whistleblower, Jeffrey Daugherty. Welcome back to our Christian whistleblower, Jeff Daugherty Show, New Cosmic Knowledge YouTube channel. And this is a question, my first book was called Apostle Paul Antichrist. And a lot of people have a lot of trouble with that. But there's an even more basic question when you're talking about Paul. How did Paul, a Roman, so thoroughly, so completely infiltrate Jewish society? Now you have to remember that when Paul came on the scene as Saul of Tarsus, as Paul, he had two names. When he came on the scene, the relationship between Romans and Jews was almost as bad as it had ever been. Jews were, depending upon the history, how you look at, either had just been allowed back into Rome or were just about to get thrown out of Rome. So it was a very, very difficult and treacherous time. The Jews were subject of a Roman occupying army. They were not happy about it, and yet somehow this guy, Saul of Tarsus, Paul the Roman, was able to infiltrate Jewish society to its deepest levels. Now I want to call your attention to some things, and I want to read you some things out of my first book, Apostle Paul Antichrist. And you see, Daugherty delivers innovation, talent, and bravery, George Norrie, Coast to Coast AM. I thought that was rather nice, and I really appreciated George doing that. And from this book, there's some very, very interesting and very, very revealing things that I want to show you. Now, this is reading out of the book. And at the time of Christ, you have to remember, all roads still led to Rome. Rome was the undoubted, undenied, unchallenged ruler of the entire world, or all of it that mattered. From the Atlantic Ocean to the Caspian Sea, from Egypt to Brittany, Rome ruled supreme. An empire roughly 60 million people strong. Let me give you an idea of what that looks like. So this gives you an idea of what this looked like. All of the known world was ruled by Rome. The whole known world was ruled by Rome without any shadow of a doubt. And here's Jerusalem down here in this area somewhere. But the whole entire world was ruled by Rome. And yet, you've got Saul of Tarsus, who is a Roman. And remember, there's 60 million people. And of that number, only 5 million were able to boast of Roman citizenship. So 60 million people. See if I can do my math right. 5 million divided by 60 million equals less than 10%, 8.3% of the people in Rome boasted of Roman citizenship. Jews in the empire suffered heavy persecution, having just been allowed back into Rome after expulsion by Claudius. With only 8 in 100 residents in good standing enjoying Roman citizenship, a Jewish Roman citizen was virtually unheard of. They were quite literally the scarcest class of people to ever walk the earth. Paul of Tarsus was one of those people. And if you doubt me, we can go right to Paul's own words. And we're in Acts chapter 22. And Paul says down here in Acts 22, Paul says to the centurion, "Is it lawful for you to scourge a man that is a Roman and uncondemned?" And when the centurion heard this, he went and told the chief captain, saying, "Take heed what you do, this man's a Roman." Then the chief captain came and said tell me, are you really a Roman? Paul says, yeah, I'm a Roman. The captain says, it cost me a lot of money to get that freedom. And Paul said, yeah, well, I was born free. So Paul was definitely a Roman. There's no doubt about that. It is borne out by his own statements in Scripture, right? Out of the King James Bible, bless God. And Saul was born in the chief city and capital of the province of Cilicia, which was a linen and a lumber center. Tarsus was known for its wealth and educational institutions. Saul's family was a product of all that. His parents were wealthy and educated, wealthy enough to have purchased Roman citizenship through the proceeds of their tent-making business. Seems like making tents for the legions of Rome was their business, and, cousin, business was booming. And if you remember, the centurion said down here, with a great sum I obtained this freedom. So, Paul's parents, Saul and Paul are the same guy, but Saul of Tarsus in his Jewish name, Paul the Roman, of course, in his Roman's name. Having been born a citizen, Paul he was born to Roman citizen, so he was automatically a citizen. Named Saul in the Jewish world, Paul in the Roman world, very, very unique individual. Now, the Jews lived in the Roman Empire in a world within a world, really. Hebrew means people from the other side. You know, those guys. It was never more true in first century Rome. They had an uneasy détente with the Roman masters. And you got to understand, this created deep, deep-seated enmity, great mistrust, great suspicion of all things Roman in the mind of Jews. And probably in reverse too, but the Romans, they weren't all that worried so much. But the Jews hated the Romans. The Jews were distrustful of the Romans. Like I wrote here, Rome mostly viewed Jews as a pesky, troublesome lot. But caution, suspicion, and distance were requisite Roman or Jewish survival skills, and those that forgot that could easily find themselves in the forum and not as spectators. So the distrust of Rome and Romans was ubiquitous, and it was understandably deep, and it was deepest within the religious community, because the religious community felt like they should be ruling Rome, ruling their own nation under God. Sound familiar? And, of course, the hardest core of the religious groups was the priestly class. And this makes Paul of Tarsus all the more intriguing, because at about 10 years of age, Paul went to Jerusalem to study under the Rabbi Gamaliel. Now, you got to understand, he wasn't just going to study under a rabbi. Gamaliel was is considered to be one of the greatest rabbis of all time. He was president of the Sanhedrin, grandson of the great Jewish teacher Hillel the Elder. The Mishnah calls Gamaliel and Hillel one of the greatest teachers in the history of Judaism. Gamaliel was the unquestioned leading rabbi of his generation. And yet somehow Roman citizen Paul, was able to go sit at the feet of Gamaliel and learn from him. Well, Jeff, how do you know? Well, Paul said, I'm a Jew, born in Tarsus, a city in Cilicia, yet brought up in this city, Jerusalem, at the feet of Gamaliel, and taught according to the perfect manner of the law of the fathers, zealous towards God, as you all are of this day. So Paul himself says, yeah, I sat at the feet of Gamaliel as a young child. Now, Gamaliel was famous for comparing his students to 4 classes of fish. Some are ritually impure fish, memorizing everything by study but have no understanding. The son of poor parents. Some are ritually pure fish, learning and understanding everything. The son of rich parents. Some are fish from the Jordan, learning everything but not knowing how to respond. Some are fish from the Mediterranean, learning everything, knowing how to respond. And incredibly, despite the prevailing climate of hate, caution, and suspicion, the Roman citizen from Tarsus was offered full access to the most sacred parts of Jewish human life. One wonders what kind of a fish Paul of Tarsus was, but one certainly recognizes that he was a very, very slippery fish. Now, from what we understand and what we know of, political intrigue and political culture, it's like we don't really have a close correlation. It would be like back at the beginning, say it's the Revolutionary War has just ended, right? And George Washington invites the cousin of King George to come intern with him in the new White House. What? No way. That's exactly what happened. Oh, and did I mention that Paul was also a Herodian? He was related to King Herod, the Herodian king that most people that were true Jewish people by birth didn't even consider a real king because they came through the Grecian line. So he was nephew to a hated king, nephew to a king that was Herodian, not even considered really Jewish. He was a Roman, and yet somehow he gets placed inside the temple with Gamaliel as a student of one of the most famous rabbis in the history of Judaism. How does this happen? Well, it happens in a couple of different ways. Number one, it happens because money, money, money. Yeah. Paul's parents were able to pay great sums of money to enable him to get there to be able to study with Gamaliel. Also, they had great political clout, making tents for the Roman army. Plus, he's nephew of the king. So, this guy leveraged his political power. Even though he was a hated Jew, he leveraged his political power to be able to study with the greatest rabbi ever, one of the greatest rabbis ever, be at the very heart of Jewish society, and eventually even become a Pharisee. Some say the leader of the Sanhedrin, though I doubt it. A Roman did this. It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any political sense. It's high intrigue, and if nothing else, it should make you wonder just how in the world did this guy do it? Just what in the world was going on? And it lets you know that something was up. Something was weird for a Roman citizen to be able to infiltrate Jewish society to its deepest and most religious elements. Something was fishy, to cop a line from Gamaliel, about this Paul fellow, about this Saul fellow, from the word go. From the time he was just a guppy, something was fishy about this fellow. How did Roman Paul infiltrate Jewish society? Just one of the many mysteries about Paul, and one of the things that combined to make him Apostle Paul Antichrist. Not in the pin the tail on the Antichrist way of thinking, but him being the first person to oppose the doctrines of Christ, as, since we're talking about presidents before, the third president of the United States, Thomas Jefferson, wrote. Something's foul in the state of Denmark. How did Roman Paul infiltrate Jewish society? I'm Jeffrey Daugherty, the Christian Whistleblower, and this is one of the things that I talk about. This is one of the ways we unwind our mind, we unindoctrinate ourselves. And once we get to the truth, we're able to be excellent to ourselves, which helps us in our quest, in our goal, in our desire to be excellent to each other.